Wow, what a great crowd. This may be the biggest that we've had since we resumed in-store events a few months ago. I think that's very exciting. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine. And we have really a great program for you this evening featuring Anthony Marra, here to talk about his excellent new novel, Mercury Pictures Presents. We're especially delighted to be hosting Tony because he's a local boy who's made it big. He grew up in the D.C. area, first down the road in Glover Park, and then up the road in Chevy Chase. I think his mom is somewhere in the audience this evening. Here's Mom, right? Here's Mom. And when his stunning debut novel, Constellation of Vital Phenomena, was published 9 years ago, when he was ripe old 28. When it was published to rave reviews and when it became a national bestseller and won awards, we here at P&P were particularly proud. Then a couple of years later came his story collection, The Tsar of Love and Techno, which also drew critical acclaim, and we figured, wow, Tony's on a roll. So like the rest of the reading public, we've been eagerly awaiting his next work. Now, Tony readily admits that Mercury Pictures Presents took a little longer than he had anticipated. He started it 8 years ago in 2014, and as he told an interviewer recently, he figured it would be finished while Barack Obama was still in office. But hey, even young, brilliant authors can get writer's block. He credits the pandemic and the restlessness that came with that, with being so isolated. He credits that with helping propel him to finish the book. And I'll just say that what he's written has certainly been worth the wait. Right, Mom? Right. Now, you'll hear in a minute from him exactly what the book's about. The setting is quite different from his first two books, but be assured that the new novels sweep its many threads that weave through geography and time, its resilient characters, its wit, insights, and its theme about the treacheries of war and propaganda will be familiar to Tony's many readers. Reviewers have had many nice things to say about Mercury Pictures Presents. The New York Times called it elegant and gorgeous, reflecting Tony's sublime dexterity and his smooth, gliding writing style. Publishers Weekly declared it meticulously crafted. And the Los Angeles Times noted that the book's story, set against fascism abroad and at home, has particular resonance, unfortunately, in our present day, and highlights how easy it is for all of us to fall prey, maybe not all of us, but a number of us, to fall prey to false romantic narratives. So suffice to say that we here at P&P continue to be very proud of Tony. Now, in conversation with him this evening will be Angie Kim, who we're also very proud of. She's also local. She's a Korean immigrant and graduate of Harvard Law School who practiced as a trial lawyer for a time, but also has experienced, like Tony, what it's like to write a best-selling debut novel, Miracle Creek, a fast-paced murder mystery that was published 3 years ago. So please join me in welcoming Tony and Angie.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Brad, for that beautiful introduction, and thank you. There's a lot of people here. It's
I know. I love this.
You
I
can't
love
really
seeing,
tell back there. It's
I love seeing all these people standing up in the aisles and things like that. It's really, really wonderful to see.
Yeah, this is an absolute treat.
Absolutely.
As Brad mentioned, this evening has been long awaited, particularly in my household. So
I love that I get a great view of your mom.
I know. I think she came because she had to see it to believe it.
I love this. Well, thank you so much for everyone for coming out tonight. And I'm so honored to be in conversation with you. I started telling the story back there, but I have to tell it now. So I started writing, creative writing in general in my 40s, about like 10, 11 years ago. And I started with taking fiction workshops at the Writer Center in Bethesda. And your story in narrative, Chechnya, which I believe was your debut story published, was one of the first that I was assigned to read. And I loved it. And I think it won a pushcart and all of these things. And so I became a fan of yours, like within the first month of becoming not a writer. You know, I didn't call myself a writer for like, you know, until maybe 3 years ago or something like that. But I mean, so when I think of writing and becoming a writer and short stories and, you know, literature, I think of you. So I was so honored to get the phone call asking if I would be in conversation with you. And also now we're at the same publisher at Hogarth with the same editor. So I'm really, really happy and excited.
It's true, and actually, so I got my start at the Writing Center, the Bethesda Writing Center as well. When I was 18 years old, I decided to take a circuitous route.
I read about this in the New York Times.
Yeah. And I took this creative writing class at the Bethesda Writing Center, and I was 18 years old. I was the youngest student by several generations.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
And the camaraderie and just, you know, getting to share your work with other people who were in love with writing, I felt like I had sort of found my people. And
yeah, I love that. Yeah, there was a great profile of you in the New York Times for people who didn't see this past weekend, and it talked about how you like didn't want to go to college, and you worked at the UPS store, and your mom is like shaking her head. It's so funny, and it said that you were taking writing classes, and I was like, I wonder if it was the Bethesda Writing Center. So I'm really glad to hear that it was. So let's talk about this wonderful novel of yours. I wanted to sort of fangirl by like reading all of these amazing reviews, but of course, we already went through that. So let's maybe skip through some of that and then just give us your own description of what the book is about and maybe the origin story. I'd love to hear that.
Absolutely, yeah. So Frank Lloyd Wright once described, once said that if you tip the world on its side, all the loose pieces will land in Los Angeles. And this was never more true than it was in the 1930s and 40s when thousands of refugees fleeing war in Europe landed in LA. And many of them ended up working in Hollywood. This ended up becoming one of the most seismic cultural transfusions in the history of California. You had, in the Pacific Palisades, Thomas Mann was working on Dr. Faustus while his brother Heinrich was a screenwriter. On the backlots of RKO and Paramount, people like Fritz Lang and Billy Wilder were creating film noir by combining German expressionist cinematography with hard-boiled American pulp. But the stories that I've found myself most interested in were those of people more on the periphery of the movie industry. You had internationally renowned playwrights like Bertolt Brecht struggling to churn out B-movie pop boilers. You had German Jewish actors who, because of their accents, were only cast playing the very Nazis that they thought they had escaped.
That's really poignant to think about.
Yeah. And during the war after America's entry, these exiles came to form the backbone of the American film propaganda apparatus, even though as citizens of Axis countries, they were classified as enemy aliens and denied the very rights and freedoms that their films championed. So that is sort of the broader world of this book, and it's sort of centered on this one character and a sort of a constellation of other characters surrounding her named Maria Lagana, who is an Italian emigre, and she works at Mercury Pictures, which is this B movie studio. And the novel sort of unfolds over the course of the late 30s, early 40s, as all of these emigres are sort of flooding into this B picture studio, and the war comes, and sort of their entwined fates create all sorts of interesting things.
I love, you know what I love the most about Maria is sort of, and about the novel too, and really all of your work is the sense of humor that's in there, sort of the juxtaposition of comedy with tragedy, and I think she is just such a witty, smart character. I kind of like fell in love with her in the very, very first scene when she's kind of making fun of her toupee wearing boss, who is going around. And so talk a little bit about humor and comedy and sort of bleakness and tragedy, and how you see the role of humor, because I just found that so really wonderful to sort of dive into, not only in this book but in all of your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that if a book isn't funny in some respect, I kind of have difficulty squaring my conception of reality with it. And I think that humor is really sort of the most eloquent expression of absurdity. And in this novel and in most of my work, characters are finding themselves in these awfully absurd situations, and humor becomes not only a way of adding a little lightness on the page, but really kind of a way of them trying to square their situation with themselves. And one of the great things about writing a novel sort of set in the movie world is that you can really draw heavily from the movies themselves. And so like Maria Lagana, this character is a bit like Rosalind Russell's character in His Girl Friday.
Yeah, that's such a great movie. Yeah, I love
and
that.
That's sort of like that snappy, this sort of like verbal jousting where where a simple conversation becomes this sparring match.
Yes, of wits, and because she's so smart.
Yeah,
too.
Yeah. I've always just been really drawn to writers who are able to conjure that sort of dialogue, and so this was an opportunity to really lean heavily into that.
I love that. Well, and since we have people who actually know you in person, are you actually funny in person? Do people say that you're funny? Okay, your mom is saying yes.
No, I see a couple of my high school friends over there shaking their heads.
Going like, no, I don't know. I love that. And so there's Maria. And one of the things that I also love is the fact that you don't just focus on her, and you don't just focus on her sort of narrow band of people who interact with her, but you really focus in on the bit players. And so this feeling that there really aren't, even though she probably gets the most airtime, that even the minor characters, so-called minor characters, do get sort of a spotlight on them from time to time, and we get to sort of dive in, and we get the sense that they're in their own worlds. I love that sense also. That's just, it makes it sort of feel so genuine and authentic.
Yeah, so right outside of Maria's office, there is a scale model miniature of...
I love this miniature.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, go. I don't want to...
It's a miniature of the studio itself. And as I was writing the book, I came to see this miniature almost as an image, almost as a metaphor for how I began to conceive of the book, as sort of this space in which I could explore the stories and the lives of all of these different characters who came from all over the world and sort of found themselves landlocked at this B picture studio during these tumultuous times. And I've, in sort of all of my work, I've been interested in the idea of trying to write books that don't have minor characters, where every character sort of gets their line or two at center stage. And I felt like that kind of sensibility works particularly well in a milieu where you literally have extras and bit players.
Absolutely. And where one of the players, the bit player, the Asian player, who's Eddie, who is Maria's boyfriend, he expresses the frustration with that in some ways. So we actually hear that in a kind of a meta way, which is very, very fun.
Yeah, yeah. This is a character. His name is Eddie. He's this very talented. He's sort of the only character in the book with any talent. And
Well, I think Maria's talented.
well, she's talented in other ways, I suppose. He's this Shakespearean trained actor, and he's Chinese American. He's third generation. He has never left the city of Los Angeles. But because of the racist typecasting that was so prevalent in Hollywood at the time, and it extends to the present day in many ways, he is as much of an outsider at Mercury Pictures as any of the exiles or emigres there. And I've always really struggled with love stories. I just find them very difficult to write convincingly, and so I've kind of steered away from them over the course of my previous books. But something about his relationship with Maria really stuck with me, and over the course of drafting, it came to play a larger and larger role. And I think it's because they're both these outsiders in very different ways. That she, as a woman and as an Italian immigrant at the studio, and he as an Asian American man trying to make it as an actor, they sort of recognize something in each other, and that becomes this real. I think their relationship is sort of the emotional core of the novel.
Absolutely, and it's it becomes very tender, and I think it really does stem from their sort of art, the way that they see each other, because they are both outsiders, but in different ways. Being able to blend in physically versus having been there all your life, and being so ingrained in the culture of LA at the time, which is what Eddie does. And she sort of looks the part of a typical American, who's white, but at the same time, she is actually somebody who's been displaced from her home, and she's been, her father's in exile, and so she has had to remake herself and reinvent herself. And I think that process of looking at each other as outsiders and sort of how that differs, but the core is the same, and the sort of aloneness and the need to sort of fit in and the insecurity that comes with that, I think that really binds them together.
Yeah, and I think they both sort of strike these uncomfortable devil's bargains with themselves.
Right.
Yeah, right. And when after Pearl Harbor, Eddie is finally gets well-paying work, but it's by playing sort of these racist caricatures of Japanese villains.
Right.
And Maria becomes involved in producing propaganda films, and I think that they each kind of recognize the moral compromises that the other has made, and I think that there is a profound degree of intimacy that you get when you are simply acknowledging that somebody else is as fallible as you are.
Absolutely. And so you do that, you look at sort of their outsiderness, their foreignness, in these different ways. And I think another way that you do that is sort of geographically, the sunny Siberia. First of all, I love sunny Siberia. I was talking to our editor earlier today, and he and I were having discussions about titles. That was a little bit heated at times, and no, and I was
Not
like,
a fraud.
I was like, well, for example, in Tony's book, I think Sunny Siberia would have been a great title, and he kind of like shut me down. But I love that concept of Sunny Siberia and how it applies to LA. And and also in Italy, where her father has been exiled, and this concept of sort of looking at two lives that are separated, even though they had the same origin, because Maria and her father were together, and there are some really poignant flashbacks of their time together, especially going to the movies instead of going to church and things like that. So talk a little bit about sort of how you decided to sort of put those two locations like sort of next to each other to explore this sunny Siberia idea.
Yeah. So after my first two novels were set in the former Soviet Union, and after doing two there, I felt ready to come in from the cold. Particularly after my wife sat me down and said, no more of this cold, miserable Russian Arctic stuff. I want to go on a fun research trip. So she's from LA. I used to live there, and this period in Los Angeles history had always appealed to me. So I'd been kicking around the idea of doing something set in LA in this time period, and at the same time I was also considering doing a novel set somewhere in southern Italy, where my dad's side of the family originates from. And so I was sort of going back and forth between these two very different ideas. I have difficulty committing to an appetizer, let alone a multi-year book project. And so this resolved itself when we went to Lipari, which is this tiny island off the coast of Sicily. It's absolutely beautiful. It's where Il Postino was filmed, and it's where my great-grandmother's family is from. And on one of our last days, tootling about this island, we saw this tiny little plaque that commemorated the artists and intellectuals and anti-fascists who had been exiled to Lipari by Mussolini's regime. This was a peculiar form of Italian punishment where various enemies of Mussolini would be sent somewhere in the south and sort of were living under house arrest. And as I was staring at this sign, I thought of these German and Austrian emigres in LA who used to refer to Los Angeles as sunny Siberia. And it occurred to me that the same term could have easily been applied to this island, to Lipari. And it seemed so bizarre that this island paradise to which I could trace my own roots had once been Mussolini's Alcatraz. And I began sort of thinking that perhaps these weren't going to be two separate books, but were rather halves of the same book, and that it would be the story of these two sunny Siberias on either side of the world, and this one family trapped between them. And I should say, so at one point, this novel, the working title was Sunny Siberia.
Okay, I was gonna ask, because the way that David shut down, I was like, "There's a story here, and I'm gonna get it out of Tony somehow."
I mean, this isn't being filmed or anything, so
No,
I think
I know.
we're
He won't
okay.
watch it. It's fine. It's fine.
So it was called Sunny Siberia, and I was having difficulty with it, some years ago, and so Cappy, my wife, got one of her friends to paint this beautiful sign that says Sunny Siberia, and so it's hanging over my desk. It's not the title of my book, but
Right now it is?
It is.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'll show you a picture of it
okay,
afterwards.
I totally want
Yeah.
to see that.
Yeah.
That is amazing. Okay, so I love title, disputes and things like that. I think they're just so fun.
How many? Was Miracle Creek always Miracle Creek?
No, in fact, it was Miracle Submarine for the longest time, and in fact, we had arcs sent out to all the librarians and booksellers and things like that, and then we decided to change it after all the arcs were out and after reviews had already started coming in. And so we had to actually send booksellers and librarians stickers, stickers, and said that said, please put this over it said creek over the word submarine. It was ridiculous. So I see some people in the audience who are like, yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Well, it is. So my first two books. Nobody can remember A Constellation of Vital Phenomena. It is the least catchy.
Really? No,
catchy title.
No, I love that title.
So
I think it's a great title.
Oh well, you're very kind.
Yeah, no, I love that.
I feel like each title is it's like I lop off one word.
Right,
so
exactly.
Pretty soon it'll just be
Tsar. Yeah.
by
No,
Anthony
I
Marra.
know. And I heard somewhere that you were talking. Oh, I think it was in your New York Times profile. You were talking about sort of how, as you know, with a progression of each novel, you feel like you're getting more and more personal. Like, for example, the inclusion of some of your family members. Would you like to tell us about that? Because I found these women so hilarious. They delighted me so much. Please tell us
Absolutely,
the true
yeah.
story of like these people that you included from your own life.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, my first book, I really consciously, I didn't want it to be about me at all. I tried to sort of remove any kind of autobiographical elements, which honestly isn't really difficult when you're, you grew up in Chevy Chase and you're writing about Chechnya. It's, but sort of as time goes on, the sort of it's almost like you realize your family might actually be kind of interesting, and it's
Imagine that, right? Yeah.
And so yeah, so with this particularly, some of my dad's relatives I brought in there. So Maria has these three great aunts named Mimi, Lala, and Pep. And I too had three great aunts named Mimi, Lala, and Pep. And they were these tiny little, Italian American ladies. They each lived late into their late 90s. I'll tell you about Mimi. She lived until she was 98, and she hated every single second of it.
I love that so much. And she's the one who says in the book, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you have your whole life ahead of you," right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's hilarious.
Verbatim. I mean,
love it.
Yeah, and she. I mean, she hated everyone. She hated her family. She was always.
But not you. She loved you.
She was very sweet on me. She was very, very nice to me. And so when Constellation came out, she would her driver's license had expired, years earlier, but that didn't stop her. She started driving. She lived in New Jersey, and she would drive around New Jersey to every bookstore she could find, and she would take copies of Constellation from the back of the store, and she'd move it to the front, and she would proceed to put them over all of the James Patterson and
I love this.
the Daniel Silva, the way up in front, and then she would just hang around and read magazines for free and hector customers into buying a copy of her grandnephew's book.
Love that. She should have gone on tour with you.
She should have.
Is what should have happened.
Yeah.
That would have been great. That
Driving
would have been great for book
in her
sales.
illegal car.
Right. So another thing that I want to tell, and you mentioned this already, the miniaturization, or the miniaturist. There's a scene really early in the novel and that's when I sort of thought, okay, no wonder it's called Mercury Pictures Presents, because I mean, obviously it's about a movie studio or it's, that's where the location is, but also it feels very cinematic to me. And there is a scene where it's at the end of a chapter, I think, or of a scene, and the camera is pulling back, and we see the camera pulling back on the miniaturized set. And so we sort of feel like the author is kind of this omniscient narrator that's sort of like looking back. And I really felt transported to the set of, this world. And, and then you sort of, it's a very cool literary device where you sort of like pulled back very deliberately, and then you chose to move the lens to a different part of the miniaturized set. And I just thought, like, with all the cinematic feel of this, is there anything that we can ask you about with respect to what's happening with respect to Hollywood or anything like that?
Are you willing to adapt it?
I feel like this is a natural, and I feel like I would love to, like, if I were an agent, I would like take this on for sure. But I feel like the cinematic scope of this just makes you think a lot in a kind of a meta way about this world that is sort of created, and this question of artifice is definitely present in this novel, where talking about a character who, uses a toupee, and that becomes like a huge thing throughout. And so I just wanted you to talk a little bit more about that and sort of the creation and how you actually deliberately create that kind of effect, because I felt like it was very deliberately done and very artfully done.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, so I've one of the things I've always, really admired about film and television is just that the camera is much more omniscient than it is in most novels. That the camera can move much more freely than most contemporary narrators are, and so that's something I really tried to avail myself of in this book. And in terms of how that sort of structures it structures around the idea of artifice. I think that artifice is something that I return to in kind of all of my work. That the Tsar of Love and Techno was primarily about falsified art and photographs in Stalin's Soviet Union. In this book, it's sort of prevalent through in a myriad of different ways. I guess one way, probably the most notable way is simply in the creation of propaganda.
Yeah, I was going to say propaganda is sort of the main route, but symbolically it's there in lots of different, even like the toupee, like which is like in the first page.
Yeah, kind of every, and I think it's in part the nature of so many of these characters are coming from places that America is now at war with. And so that creates the sort of necessity to disguise yourself. And so these various characters are constantly sort of putting up these smoke screens. And I kind of was fascinated with the idea of how Hollywood in general, if you're a Midwesterner running to Hollywood, you reinvent yourself, but how the stakes become so much higher if you're coming from a place that, that America is at war with. And so many of these characters are involved in the creation of propaganda, and this was a really fascinating period of film history and American history in general, just because the film technology at the time was very rudimentary, and so many propaganda films put out by the U.S. Army were filled with reenactments. The most famous documentary of the period was by John Huston called San Pietro, and it's almost entirely reenactments that were, sort of billed as these real sort of recorded evidence. And at the same time, the popularity of these movies sort of was reflected within dramatic films. Suddenly, dramatic films were trying to shoot in a sort of quasi newsreel style. Sort of, there was this pent up demand for the resemblance of reality rather than reality itself.
Well, and that makes me think about another thing that was there were so many things like this in the book that made me sort of like want to Google it and sort of go, was this real or not? Like there was something about like a village, the village that the US government created, and in order to in order to sort of demonstrate what might happen, and it was like presented in a documentary format or whatever, and but it seemed like it was real. I remember reading in a review that it was actually like a real thing that your research had uncovered, which is so interesting because historical fiction, playing with historical fiction, I just wanted to know like what was your research like, and the sort of not necessarily the uncovering of things too, but also sort of connecting them to the story that you had in mind. Talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I think historical fiction always has to grapple with is nostalgia. That it's very easy to sort of paint a very sunny view of the past. And so one of the ways that I've tried to sort of write against that has been to examine how history has been fictionalized by political actors. And one of the one of the opportunities that this book presented was looking at sort of these stories that maybe aren't as well known about the war years. That it's very easy to look back at that period as sort of this moment when America was fighting a just war, and that we were 100% good guys. And so German Village is an example of this. This was a recreation of a Berlin neighborhood that the U.S. Army built in the Utah desert in connection with Hollywood set designers and members of the Bauhaus architect school. And it was a series of tenement blocks that were meticulously fabricated. So all of the furnishings were built by German POWs or were purchased secondhand from German American families in New York City. The floorboards were shipped in from Russia because the type of timber used in Russian floorboards were similar to that you would find in German tenements. At night, firemen would drive around these buildings, hosing them down, not because there were any fires, but because they wanted to ensure that the wood had the exact right humidity level to correspond with that in German buildings. And why go to all of this effort to create this truly molecularly accurate depiction of a Berlin neighborhood? And it was because they were trying to figure out how to ignite a firestorm in German cities. And I was really struck with this little sort of footnote of American World War II history, in part because so many of the people involved were themselves exiles who were deeply homesick for Berlin. And it's completely understandable, why they would dedicate themselves to this project given their history. But at the same time, there seems something really poignant about the idea that they were trying to recreate this place that they couldn't go to, and the only way they could go to it was to abet in its ultimate destruction.
Right.
And so little moments like that where the artifice, I think, gets you to some deeper emotional truth are
Absolutely.
are moments that I tried to really draw out throughout the novel.
Yeah, and also the role of art in dealing with, these types of tragedies, and the role of art in destroying some of those as well. I want to be mindful of our time, and we have so many people here, and I'm sure that you want to come up and ask questions. We are asking that, because this is being taped, that you come up to the microphone if you have any questions. So if you'd like to line up with any questions, and I have so many more. So while you are actually, getting yourselves ready to ask questions, I will ask you some more. Yes?
So I just noticed my 8th grade English teacher is here, who taught me how to write.
I love that.
And he has suffered through so many book reports that I've given. I'm delighted that you're suffering through one more.
I love that. So I have some other questions while you guys are coming up. I mean, one thing that I wanted to ask about is, or comment on, really, it's not really a question, but it's just how very resonant it is for me right now, which is so funny because it's historical fiction. It's happening, years and decades ago, and yet it feels so relevant to right now. I think because we're talking about the role of, outsiders, and we're also talking about the subversion of truth and not being able to tell what's true and not, and all of these things. It feels really, really relevant to right now. Do you think that when you set out to write this, that you could have anticipated that? I mean, because we talked about how, you thought that you were going to be done with this novel before Obama was out of office, so.
I mean, it's never good when a novel set in the 40s is timely.
No,
it's,
fascism is, no,
Yeah.
it's, I was saying, that feels like right now is not great,
Yeah. I mean, I guess that sort of in all of my work, I've been interested in how, just how we reconstruct a sense of history and a sense of reality. I think that my characters are almost always in this struggle to piece together an understanding of the world they inhabit amid all of the fictions that populate it. And I think, unfortunately, that's something that no matter the era, is sort of an evergreen, an evergreen truth of sort of human nature, that we are constantly lying to ourselves and to each other. And I think that those very lies end up revealing quite a lot about us, about our dreads and hopes and dreams. And that's certainly something that I was thinking of in this project.
Yeah, and also again, the role of art in sort of, even though, in a kind of a meta way, even though it's not sort of supposed to be what's happening exactly right now, that it actually does help to uncover that. We have a question.
Hi, thank you for doing this. I have a question that I always have for authors of your caliber, which is, it's a two-parter. Who do you read for absolute pleasure? Like, I don't have to read this. It's not research. It's not my friend. I'm just so looking forward to this. This is what I'm taking to the beach. And then who do you read who you learn from at your stage of your career, where you read it and then you have to go back and think, oh, that's how she did it. Oh, I wonder if I could try that.
So for pure pleasure, Lee Child.
Same.
I'm a huge. He's so good.
The cliffhanger.
Yeah.
You can't stop reading. Every chapter, you're like, I have to go to bed, but I gotta read.
So I'm embarrassed by how many times I've reread Lee Child's entire oeuvre. I
reread it. That's funny, because you would think that once you've.
Oh no! I mean, 6 or 7 times in, it's still, there's still more juice you can squeeze from a Lee Child novel. I began suffering from insomnia a couple years ago, and I started listening to Lee Child books. And this sounds like a backhanded compliment, but it's not. But after you sort of know, after you know the novel and you know what's going to happen next, there's something about being able to be lost in a world but not being so hooked to it that that you're going to stay up all night. I still listen to Lee Child books every night to fall asleep.
That is okay. We're going to quote that.
But a writer that I learned from.
You need to hit him up for a blurb for the next one.
I know, yeah. Zadie Smith, I would say, is the person that I return to again and again. I think she is. It's just so hard to be that funny and that smart and that gorgeous a writer. And I think that White Teeth and On Beauty are just two of those books that we'll be reading in 200 years. I won't. I'll be dead. Yeah. But she is somebody that I think is a true genius, and there's so much to learn from her books.
Thank you.
Other people, feel free. Okay, great.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I'm here with my book club tonight, and we've been together for 14 years. And of all the books that we've read, Constellation, A Vital Phenomenon is our #1 book out of 14 years of book club books.
Thank you so much.
So we're really excited to be here. And I'm curious, I think the reason that it speaks to us so much as a book club is because of the powerful way that you write the people and their emotion and their connection to one another. And, you've been talking a little bit about how you do your research for historical fiction, but if you're not drawing from yourself, especially, where are you getting that? How do you write those powerful human connections?
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm absolutely honored. I think that most of my work is the product of just trying to be interested in people. Whenever I've taught creative writing classes or anything, the thing that I feel like I'm trying constantly banging my drum about is just about curiosity, and how I think that if you're just curious in what it's like to be another person, that's where a lot of good fiction comes from. And so with Constellation, I was just really interested in what it would be like to be a very talented doctor at this hospital, and what it would be like to be a comically inept doctor sort of trying to get a job at that hospital. And I feel like I mean, this isn't a very smart answer at all, but I think so many my notes are all questions. Like when I'm writing notes for a project, it's never an assertion, it's never a statement. Every single note is just a question. What if this happened? What would it be like, if you were X, if you were Y, if you experienced Z? And I feel like simply by almost framing your fictional world as a series of questions that you're not even trying to answer, but are maybe just trying to articulate more fully, that hopefully you arrive to that place where those emotions and those psychological insights feel real, I guess.
Thank you. So imagination and empathy, huh?
Something like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Thanks.
Hi.
So I'm interested in your three great aunts, and full revelation. I've known your family for a long period of time, and certainly heard stories around the dinner table about Mimi. I'm not going to tell all of them, but what is it about that generation of your family, the women in particular, that were so interesting and so independent, that you found that they had something relevant to today?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's they were sort of survivors first and foremost. I mean, many of their siblings died in infancy. Their brother, my grandfather, was named Anthony, and he was the second child in that generation named Anthony, because the older Anthony died and he got the name Anthony, and so to grow up in a household where half of your siblings have perished, and then to go on to die at the age of 98, I think it takes a bit of moxie, and I think that that sort of very fatalistic, sort of dour worldview, that I think is maybe a natural result of sort of growing up in a household where there's quite a bit of trauma, always just sort of appealed to me, and I think it's one of those things when you're a kid, the smallest things maybe make people seem a little magical. So my great aunt Pep, Giuseppina, who lived in Brooklyn, and later when she was older, she moved into an assisted living facility down here. But when she still lived in Brooklyn, and I was a very little kid, I remember going to her apartment, and her toilet seat was this powder blue padded toilet seat, and I remember it, like, just as a kid, just thinking, like, this must be how, like, the royals live. Like this is luxury, a powdered blue padded toilet seat. And I think it's just, those little bits of ephemera from your life end up, if it wasn't for that powdered blue toilet seat, we wouldn't have this book, I suppose.
Any other questions? Tell us about what you're working on. I think we're all very eager for that, right?
I'm working on my tan.
Really? Okay. Well, maybe don't, and go inside to your closet and write some more for us.
Yeah, I'm not working on anything right now. It's yeah. So we'll.
Don't they say that you should really start writing your next novel like before?
They do,
you know,
don't they?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
I mean, I know this
I
very
wish
well.
somebody would write it for me.
I know, me too. I know, me too. Tell us about the writing of this novel, because I did read that you encountered it took longer than you thought, and whatever. But that it was actually, ironically, the pandemic that helped you to focus and sort of get that done.
Yeah. So at the time, my wife and I were living in Massachusetts in this ancient apartment building, and it's. We moved there right before the pandemic began, and it was a 1-bedroom apartment that had about a dozen closets. The floor plan was primarily closets.
I love this. I love this house.
Yeah, like
That's
the refrigerator was in a closet, kind of
Oh my
everything.
God.
Everything was in a closet, and so I had a writing closet that I'd managed to wedge a desk into. And
See, I have a writing closet where I can't even fit a desk in there. I just sit on the floor.
wow.
Yeah, I'm like really dedicated to this
That-
writing closet idea.
I'm very impressed.
Yeah, very. Yeah.
So when the pandemic began, all of a sudden I was landlocked in this apartment with all of our, sort of disturbingly numerous closets, and I began for the first time in years really to really just feel the pull of the page. And every morning I would walk into my closet and I would step into Los Angeles or Italy. I think that one of the most profound qualities of fiction is the ability to transport you
Absolutely.
out of your daily life, and that was definitely. That was definitely the case with that, and I found that not only was I excited to sort of disappear into these worlds, but I wanted to sort of conjure a bit of the the lightness that just felt missing in those early months of the pandemic. And so every couple of weeks I would print out what I had written, and I would show it to Cappy, my wife, and I would immediately hide in one of the other closets.
Was she in the closet too?
No,
Or
no,
was she allowed
had-
to like emerge from the closet?
No, she had the living room, and I was in.
Okay,
yeah.
of course.
And I realized that I was onto something with this book when I began to hear her laughter through the wall, and
love that.
that sort of became my goal, was that I wanted to write a book where I could hear her.
That's so sweet. I
laughing.
love that. Okay, so do you go into the writing closet? This is actually kind of a serious question, because I do this for myself, even though it's about writing in closets. Do you feel like going into, because people make fun of me all the time. They're like, why do you write in a closet when you have like a house with like 7 bedrooms or something? I'm exaggerating, but we have a house, and and it's ridiculous. And I'm like, I want to be in a place where there is nothing, and I can just sort of like imagine myself to be wherever I want to be. And I really mean that seriously. So I just wondered if your writing in the closet was similar, or if you just had to write in a closet because you had no choice.
If I would have been much more comfortable writing in a master suite.
Okay,
I
all
think,
right.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because we were talking about going to Ragdale, and I was like, wait, I don't know if I can write in places that actually have like, views and pretty stuff that I can look at.
Yeah.
And then what about like writing as far as your day is concerned? Like, so do you have like a set number of, hours or words, and do you write, because this book in particular, because it flows so smoothly, is it the kind of thing that you just write linearly? Like, do you have to write from beginning to end? Do you outline first? I'd love to. I want tips on like how we can all be brilliant novelists, right?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not the one to give those. I like keeping records, so I usually try to write down how many words I write a day, and my goal is usually around, when I'm like sort of in the thick of it, is usually around 1,000 words a day. And if I write,
That's a lot. That's
Well-
like, how many hours is that?
I mean, that would probably be like 4 or 5 hours.
Okay, but even so, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so if I write 1,000 words or more, I write it down in black ink, and if it's less than 1,000 words, I write it down in red ink.
Oh, I love. Yeah, it's the ledger.
Exactly. Over a while, you kind of just begin to dread the idea of seeing red ink in your ledger. That it's a way to put our guilt to good use.
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So usually it's just trying to write your way into something.
More black than red.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that like the more you produce, that in the end probably the vast bulk of it is gets tossed in the trash can. But,
Right.
But you kind of need to write all the bad stuff in order to get to something that you want to keep.
I totally agree. I have a spreadsheet. I'm also like that, and I try to, and whenever I procrastinate, which is very, very, very frequent, I put I have these time blocks on my spreadsheet on so each day. And so like if I procrastinated from like 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., then the whole block I put in big red. And so then at the end of the day, I'm horrified by the fact that like I have all red and like 2 green, 2 blocks of green or whatever. So it's a similar concept. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that we're out of time. Tony's going to be signing up here, right?
And
But
please
thank you.
purchase a copy of Miracle Creek. It
Oh,
is so good.
thank
It is
you.
one of my favorite books of the last few years. It's
Oh, thank
really
you.
gorgeous.
So nice. Thank you.
Well, Tony and Angie, thank you so much. Tony, you talk about writing to make your wife laugh. I don't know if you heard, but you were cracking up your mom through much of this. She loved that blue toilet seat
I
story.
love that. I love that.
Copies of Tony's book are available at the checkout desk. He'll be up here signing. Please form a line to the right of the table. And our staff would appreciate it if you fold up the chairs and lean them against something solid. Thanks again for coming.